Okay, this is Delphina Bailey Nichols, and this is the follow up video for the sixth night of Passover, and which was Wednesday. And tonight I want to talk about modern miraculous deliverances which have occurred um, in modern times for my more recent ancestors of Hebrew descent. And, I'm not talking about my entire family tree. I'm just talking about my paternal grandfather's side. And so, so I want to get talk about the miraculous deliverance of the um, the Hebrews of the Cabo Verde, or also known as Cape Verde Islands, and the kind of the backdrop to what got all those orphaned or sold out children there, and how their descendants were able to get free. Okay, and how it happened miraculously, and how it relates to my father's my paternal granddad's family. All right. So in Europe, they had been enslaved for a period of 200 years in Spain and Portugal. They got invaded by Muslims, and the Muslims were their masters, and they were even selling some of the white men. Sorry, they were selling some of the white women butt naked in the marketplace with a leash around their neck like a dog. And they even made paintings to commemorate the subjugation and humiliation of the women. Because again, in ancient times, a lot of pagan kings and also a lot of Hebrew kings in error, they wanted to kill all the men. And if you're lucky, keep also the women too, and not solely the female children alive, and take everybody's money. And the Muslims who invaded Europe, they didn't deviate far from that type of behavior. They didn't kill all the men, but they sure as hell subjugated and humiliated the women, taking off all their clothes and parading them around on a leash like a pet. And the even worse part is that even after the Muslims were kicked out of Europe, the white men, the white male patriarchs, they did the same shit to the women, where instead of getting a divorce, sometimes the white male patriarchs would take their wife to the market with a leash around her neck like she's a dog and sell her as property to another man. Men were not required to get divorced. So when you look at the types of behaviors that white women tend to be known for all over the world, you got to look at what Asian invaders did to them. You got to look at what black male Muslims did to them. And then you got to look at what their own men did to them after they left. And all those years of taking all that shit off of everybody, and everybody and their grandma running up in Europe to conquer them, that contributed to the more unsavory behaviors that everybody on the whole planet tends to know that a lot of white women are known for. And I'll just put it like that. They didn't get that way overnight. They went through a lot of shit for a long time to become what you see today. So with that said, the Muslims who had conquered them in Europe, they were actually from Senegal. And, so it was the Muslims of Senegal who had opened the way for them to be subjugated for 200 years. It wasn't the ones from the Middle East who was organized enough to do that. Because again, this is ancient culture. So once they kicked those guys out, they said, okay, well, they passed a law saying that any person who was a Jew had to wear a yellow turban in public. And the yellow turban is supposed to mark Jews, as make sure everybody knew who the Jews were in the community, and also to make it known that they were second-class citizens and not full citizens of Europe. And so this is the time we live in, you know. And eventually what happened was the Jews of Spain and Portugal, who they were made second-class citizens and forced to wear yellow turbans in public because they had too close of a relationship with the Muslim community of Morocco. And traditionally, the Muslim community of Morocco has been known to be less violent and less prone to colonizer behavior in comparison to the Muslims of the Middle East and the Muslims of Senegal. The Morocco Muslims, they had a reputation for peaceful dealings with their Jewish neighbors for 1,000 or more years, actually. And they're probably the only Muslim community on this planet to have ever had a 1,000-year peace with the Jews. So the Europeans, with them being so paranoid after they forced their Muslim masters out, you know, they quickly subjugated the Jewish allies of the Moroccans, because they were thinking, okay, well, if we allow them to have too much comfort and too much freedom, they might open the door for us to get conquered all over again. You know, this was the thinking of the white Catholics in Spain and Portugal. They didn't want to go back into subjugation under the non-Moroccan Muslims. So, you know, and they went from passing the laws to identify all Jews with the yellow turban and marking them as second-class citizens. They went from that to genociding the Jewish community across Spain and Portugal, because a lot of those people were business owners. They had nice homes, they had businesses, they had money. And so, because they were really paranoid after being conquered by the Asian Huns and the Romans and the Black Muslims, and because they had been invaded pretty much by everybody under the sun, they just lashed out with a vengeance and cut the heads off of all of the Jewish adults, the men and the women. And they kept the female children and sent the male children to work as slaves in the Cape Verde Islands off the west coast of Africa. And they sent all the little Jewish boys, aged 2 and older, to work as slaves. And the excuse that they gave to the rest of Europe for doing this to the children was, the excuse they gave was, well, we had to cut the heads off of all their parents and enslave them because they owed a debt to us. There was no debt. They just wanted to do it because they were afraid that the peaceful Moroccan Muslims would invade them because they had a positive relationship with the Jews. That's really what it was. But again, when you live in a colonized territory, you have to remember that people can give any excuse under the sun, no matter how weak it is. There'll be little or no investigation, just like in the story of the Book of Esther. And that's the end of your livelihood, the end of your marriage, or the end of your life. And that's no different than what happened to the Jews of Spain and Portugal. They just did what they were going to do and then made up an excuse later. And everybody was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, that's great. So some of the European Jews, they were rich enough and had enough money to run away to other territories. So some ran away to Turkey, and the Jewish children who have been evacuated from Turkey recently, they might be descendants of the white Jews who ran away to Turkey. And of course, they're not there anymore. They're in Israel now because Russia attacked. And some of the white Jews had also ran away to India to join the Black Cochin Jewish community of India in Kerala, which used to be a trading outpost where they were trading with King Solomon, for spices and gold and silver and all that stuff on the Silk Road trade route through Asia and Nigeria and Italy and all that in China. So these white Jews, because they knew where all the Silk Road communities were, some of them, they ran to the Black Cochin Jew community in Kerala, India. And unfortunately, they tended to segregate themselves and tended to show racial prejudice towards the Black Cochin Jews in Kerala. And you're only going to hear about that if you listen to the non-mainstream interview of Elias, the elder who did not pack up to move to India with all he didn't pack up to move to Israel with all the young people. He stayed behind. So unfortunately, the Jews of Spain and Portugal, the ones who were wealthy enough to run, they were very, very racist, just like the people who were trying to cut their heads off and enslave their children, unfortunately. And now those particular ones, they left with a lot of the young Black Cochin Jews of India and went back to Israel as well. Now the Jews who went to the Cape Verde Islands as enslaved children, those were the ones whose parents were not wealthy enough to run. Those were the ones who just were not lucky enough to escape having their family killed, possibly in front of them. And these little boys who were taken from Europe, they were probably scarred for life just because their parents had a different religion and a little bit of Middle Eastern ancestry. And after they were sent to the sugar plantations on the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa, there were Black African girls who were sold to the sugar plantations so they could breed more slaves and keep the whole thing going. So now, not only did you have all these little boys whose parents were murdered, possibly in front of them, little boys ages 2 through 12, praying to the God of Moshe, praying to the God of Moses, praying to the God of Jesus. These little kids praying to whoever they could pray to, and also being forced to practice the Catholic religion. And now they finally have access to little girls, and these are little girls whose people betrayed them too, sold them like property for breeding. So the culture that you see in Cape Verde, it tends to be more of a blended culture than what you see in Kerala, India, because this was a culture created by children who underwent subjugation and betrayal at the hands of their own people. Okay, these are little kids, little heavily European mixed Jewish boys from Europe who probably never seen a dark-skinned person before. And then you got these Black African girls, a lot of them, they probably never seen a white person before. And they're little kids, they're scared, they're traumatized, and they're stuck with each other. And they're growing up together as being abused, treated like property, and praying to whoever they could pray to, hoping it'll stop. And we know that those little boys never lost their faith. They never lost their faith in God, because even years later, after Cape Verde was set free from Portugal and they had the freedom to be to choose if they wanted to be Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or whatever religion. Once they got the freedom to choose, then there were cemeteries with the Star of David that were built up on the island. So that right there tells us that those children ages 2 through 12, even though they were forced to be Catholics, even though they were treated like livestock and like animals, they never lost faith that someday the same God who set their ancestors free in Egypt would set them free in the Cape Verde Islands. They never lost that faith, because once the stranglehold of control was gone and they could be whatever religion they wanted, boom, these cemeteries with the Star of David on it, right there on the island. They taught their children to remember where they come from. And also, there were also Canadian Beothuk men from Canada who went through that ordeal together with the children. And the presence of the Canadian Beothuk men, there's a possibility that maybe it might have helped them with maintaining their faith, that they'd be free someday. This might have also helped with them having the voice of a real adult present, because aside from the Native American men taken from the Beothuk tribe in Canada, the only other adults were the ones beating the shit out of them and treating them like livestock. So this, this played a role in their development as well. That's not as well known. Okay. And Kurmeo Ahau, a young Costa Rican man who is mestizo, he has an online school for Black people who are of Native American descent. And in his online school on YouTube for Black people of Native American descent, he actually talks about the Canadian Beothuk tribe people who were taken out of Canada, only the men and not the women, and sent to work in the Cape Verdean Islands as slaves. And until I saw that video he made in his online school, I had no idea that there were ever any Native American people there. I had no idea. And when I looked up pictures of the men from that tribe, it was a real eye-opener, because I had seen images of those people in my mind in visions after I got pregnant with my first baby at 30 years old. And I would have never guessed that those people that I was seeing in my mind after having my first baby actually lived on the same island as my very Black father's, Hebrew descent relatives. I had no idea. So I feel very blessed that Kurmeo Ahau released his lessons on his online school to help me make sense of images that I was seeing in visions and didn't understand. I feel blessed by people who hid the histories of my ancestors in library cookbooks. I feel grateful for my distant cousins in the Northeast who have put part of the history of our people on the internet, and I was able to put all that together to get a story that's so much deeper and more dramatic, than the lie from colonizers, which says it's a dusty island where everybody's descended from one Caucasian monk. That's not true at all. There were even either indentured servants or slaves brought in from China as well. And when I got a DNA test, a lot of that stuff, not just a lot of it, all of it came out in my DNA test, as a matter of fact, when I got tested by 23andMe. So I know it's not a lie, because the Chinese, the Arab, which is actually Jewish, all of that comes out. But the only thing is, the African part of my DNA test is actually not correct. For the African part of my DNA, I went ahead and got tested by a company owned by Black scientists. So I know I'm not Nigerian. You know, the Black part of my family tree, it's Fulani, which is the oldest haplogroup from ancient Egyptian people who left Egypt and didn't go back. I know the African part of my DNA is also from Jola, Mende, and Temne tribe people, not Nigerian at all. So even though it's helpful to have DNA tests and they can confirm verbal histories from parents, it's still good to also get companion tests from scientists who are from the African bloodlines and have a company dedicated solely to that. And on the Native American side, it can be good to have a DNA company founded by Native American people, who are mature and not trying to enforce a mestizo bias, like the colonizers. So that way you can put it together and compare it with a very good source like 23andMe that's excellent but not entirely accurate. But anyway, moving on. So I'm doing the backstory and the backdrop to give a loose idea of what was going on down in these islands. And what happened is, there was like my great uncle, Marcelino Manuel da Graça. Yeah, that's my great uncle, my grandfather's, my great grandfather's brother. Marcelino Manuel da Graça, when he was born, everybody on the island said that it was his destiny to be a healer and a prophet when he became an adult. So while he was still a child, somebody, I don't know who, had a prophecy about him doing great things when he would grow up. Okay. And in the 1900s, when my great uncle was born, the islands were still under the control of Portugal. They actually didn't get their freedom from Portugal until 1975. Okay. And so my great uncle, Marcelino Manuel da Graça, he grew up in the islands knowing that God had a calling on his life. Okay. And my great grandfather, Benventura da Graça, he also grew up to become a pastor too, just like my great uncle. And what happened is there was an outbreak of disease that was so bad and so many people died that they couldn't even bury all the bodies. There's just dead bodies laying everywhere. Just people dropped dead all over the place. And because they were trying to do damage control, they just let all the pigs run loose on the island, and the pigs were eating some of the bodies because they just couldn't bury them fat people fast enough to keep up. And my great granddad and his brother, their sister had actually died. And I'm not sure if she died as a result of the outbreak or disease, but she was fully dead. Okay. Fully dead, confirmed by the community. And my great uncle, it was actually him who had raised her back to life from the dead. So they saved their sister. And the plague that swept through the Cape Verde Islands and just dropped so many people dead at lightning speed on both sides, that's what finally broke the stranglehold of control that the Catholics from Portugal had on the islands. That helped them to eventually get their freedom in 1975, which is much later. Now, years before the official freedom came, My great granddad and his brother, they traveled here to America, to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and they were dirt poor and they had nothing. They were living in a shack harvesting cranberries on a cranberry plantation. And a lot of American black people didn't really relate well to them because they were foreigners. So what they did was they perfected the art of mimicry and pretending that they were American so they could try to teach their own people how to fit in better with Americans. Okay. And they actually founded the Church of the Nazarene here in America. And my great uncle, his new American name that he adopted for himself was Charles Sweet Daddy Grace. And my great granddad, his new American name that he adopted for himself became Joseph de Grace. And my great uncle Charles, also known as Charles Sweet Daddy Grace, he was kind of wild. He was kind of flamboyant. He was actually the originator of the purple suit stereotype in the black community. He was the originator of the putting on the cape to dance and all and perform and all that James Brown does. You know, my great uncle Charles, he was the originator of that too. In his ministry, he healed a lot of people, and he also planted more than 300 churches in America. And before his ministry, interracial churches, so far as I know, they did not exist before Uncle Charles came along. And during a time when there was no welfare, no food stamps, and no Medicaid, he helped a lot of his people from the islands to survive and to buy land to have permanent homes. He created a lot of jobs and cosmetics industries, all different kinds of industries that kept the Black Cape Verdean community and also the Black American community employed, okay? And if there were poor white people who wanted to come eat in the soup kitchens and to come get a clothing donation, he didn't tell them, oh, you're white, your people are racist, you can't come here. If there were white people who wanted to eat in the soup kitchen or get a clothing donation or worship in the church, they were allowed to do that. The white community didn't do that. But this man, he was a real Christian, and, you know, he was also a very real Jew as well. So he allowed that. You know, although he did a lot of flamboyant stuff that he probably knew was wrong, it gained him the attention and the notoriety that he needed to build up his industries that were helping people to buy land, to live in permanent homes, and to have stable jobs when in a time when there was no government assistance of any kind anywhere. His businesses actually raised $45 million. And the $45 million, it all went into the church. He kept none of it in his old age. He gave it all away. He invested all of it into building up communities, businesses, and churches. And he passed, so far as I know, my great uncle passed none of that money down to his descendants. You know, and there's spiritual reasons for that. So though he may have said things and did things that was kind of wild and not entirely correct, it still got him the attention that he needed to keep his people afloat financially. So that's how I'm looking at it. You know, if you talk to older Black people in Harlem, they'll say, oh, Charles Sweet Daddy Grace, he was a pimp in the pulpit and he was a shady, corrupt pastor. And granted, to a degree, that might have been true because he was playing up the drama and doing a lot of mimicry of American behaviors and doing things to help keep people employed, to keep them from freezing to death in winter, to make sure they had soup kitchens, clothing donations, land ownership. He had Black families piled up in several mansions. He had founded a lot of businesses and a lot of land ownership initiatives that kept his people afloat as a community, but without alienating their neighbors of other races. He, as a pastor with a healing ministry and also as a drama king, doing stuff that was blatantly and obviously like really pushing a lot of boundaries. He really saved a lot of lives and helped a lot of people to get a firm foundation. And in his old age, when he eventually left the East Coast and went to California, because he was divorced many times, because of course, male leaders, they always have thirsty females begging for their attention. So he had been divorced a couple times. And when he moved to California, he had remarried again to a Mexican woman. So there's a Mexican branch of the family as well. And he did not pass any of the money or wealth down to them either. It was for the community, for the 300 churches that he planted. And there's a Bible verse. I gotta look it up. I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's something about if you seek the word of the Lord every day, then you'll be firmly rooted and planted like a tree that grows beside running water. And that one verse is a really good example of how my great uncle ran his ministry, where people, they would worship and study together and also have workshops for learning Black American behaviors. He would have workshops for employment skills for men and women. They would praise God. They would do their spirituality stuff, and also their classes for building themselves up economically. They would do this every day, not just one day out of the week, not just 2 or 3 days out of the week. They came together as a community every day to work on their finances and their spirituality. And his pattern for building up his churches, it seems to follow that one verse that I got to look up that says you'll be firmly rooted like a tree beside running water if you meditate on the word of the Lord every day. And that's what they did. That's what they did. And while they were busy building themselves up spiritually and financially across the water, like I said, a lot of people, they just dropped dead at lightning speed. And then, by the time 1975 rolled around, the freedom from Portugal was official and legal. And am I saying that it's good that had to happen? No, I'm not saying it's good, because there were some people on both sides who fell. My great uncle's sister fell to that, even though she got resurrected from death. But with that said, they clearly had the hand of God upon them as they moved out from under the subjugation to Portugal. And some of my cousins, some of my Cape Verdean cousins, some of them actually live in Canada today, where some of the Native American ancestors came from. Instead of living in America, they're in Canadian territory. And this story of how this transatlantic slave trade began, it's very miraculous, it's very dramatic. It produced a generation of male leaders who didn't always do everything right, but they were great providers for the islanders, the Black American community, and even people of other races who came to the church looking for real Christians to show charity and compassion. They did all of that. They didn't go to extremes one way or another, and they had a firm idea of what you're supposed to do as a leader who's providing for your own people and educating your own people spiritually and financially, and also being charitable to outsiders as well. They had a firm understanding of how to do that. Now, was my great uncle a great husband? Obviously, no, because most men wouldn't be when they're in that position and they got a lot of females begging for their attention. No, he was not a great husband. He was remarried several times. But was he a brilliant businessman? And was he someone who built up the faith and the spirituality of his people? Yes. Yes. And he might not have even had anything to do with a lot of Portuguese dropping dead and his people being set free, in the islands, back where that he had left from. He might not even have anything to do with it. It could have been somebody else who was more focused and more serious about their game. It could even been some children, just the prayers of babies. Like, who knows? And in my next video in this series, I want to talk about the even more dramatic, more unnatural, and more drastically, blatantly obvious events that have happened. Oh, I forgot to talk about the reestablishment of Israel. Yeah, Israel was actually reestablished not that far off from the timeline of the plague in the islands. Like in the 1900s, before 1975, you didn't just have the plague in the islands, you also have the reestablishment of the state of Israel, a war that put Israel back on the map. And if I'm not mistaken, if I'm recalling correctly, there was different weird things that happened that gave the Jewish army advantages on the battlefield to put Israel back on the map. I think there was some really aggressive winds blowing and some weird things that happened with telecommunications on the enemy side, and a lot of stuff that just really placed the enemy at a disadvantage in the war to put Israel back on the map. And I'm a little older. My memory is not quite as rock solid as it used to be. I got to work on that. But yeah, like in, the putting Israel back on the map and also liberating the Cape Verde Islands through everybody just dropping dead all of a sudden in what people thought was a plague. All of that was around the same time period between 1909 and 1945, 1975. It was all kind of in there, in that time range. And in my next video, I want to talk about things that are far more miraculous than what that generation saw, which has been happening now in modern times on holy days ever since 2001, and how it's been happening more frequently and escalating in the miraculousness and the dramatic stuff that's been happening on holy days and also national holidays. And so my next video that's talking about more recent miracles that's way more blatantly obvious and unnatural, That's going to be kind of a long video. I'm probably going to have to sit and like really, really make some detailed notes to get it all in. And even though I'm going to cover a lot of really wild, blatantly obvious miracles that have been intensifying since 2001, I'm probably not going to catch all of the dramatic events that happened on holy days and national holidays. There's some stuff that even I didn't catch. And there's a young guy from Florida who has a Firehouse Church in Chicago. He's really, really good about picking up on some of the events that I missed. He's more detail oriented than I am. I tend to kind of look more at the bigger picture. But William, his Firehouse Church ministry in Chicago tends to be way more detail oriented, okay, in his approach to talking about Yeshua and his approach to talking about current events. And I'm not saying that he has all the answers. I'm not saying he always does everything right. Neither do I. But we're people who are working on it and trying to get there. And for me, I'm looking at the bigger picture. And if I don't see a specific level of communication in my life, then that lets me know, okay, well, I need to improve. I need to figure out where I'm wrong. Even if something might be accepted as a tradition in the church or accepted as a tradition in Israel, I'm the kind of person where I'm still going to look at it and I'm like, is this something that I need to discontinue or cut out of my practice, or is this something I need to include? I'm trying to get things right in my own way and for my own reasons. And I've been working on this for like 18 years now. I've been working on it since I was a very young girl. It's just now that I'm older, my reasons for working on it are very, very different from the reasons that I had as a young girl. So with that said, the next video is going to be way more dramatic on the miraculous and, blatantly supernatural stuff that happened on a massive scale on holy days since 2001 and more frequently going forward into 2030. And that's all for tonight's video.